Good evening. How's everybody? Good. All righty. I came in right on time. I had a late email I had to answer for one of the instructors. All right. Glad to see everybody tonight. I'm glad Tamala is with us tonight. She's our star of the week. Let me go over my list as we start with what I saw in work this week in our weekly schedule. So the reason why Tamala is the star of the week, let me get my notes here. She has already finished. She's already into task 3. She's finished 4 discussion boards and she's burning it up. So congratulations to Tamala. We had some other, there she is. Shout out to her. Excellent job. Keep setting the standard. I had some other stars this week. Let's see if any of them are with us this week as well. Alicia was a star this week. What I liked, she summed it up uh, pretty succinctly when she talked about a bus accident. If you're the supervisor, if students go to the hospital, so do you. I like that. That's a good reminder for all of us of that financial and that our liability. That's a requirement that we do that, and I'm glad she remembered that. Um, Glenda made a good point. I don't see Glenda on the screen, but a lot of the policies aren't specific enough, and she's right. They have gaps in them. So for that reason, let me share my screen. For that reason, I have got one in here from one of our former colleagues who just got a big job. I'm trying to remember what job she got. Not important. Jackie Tinsley. She was an AP at early college out in, I don't know, Stanley, Cabarrus, somewhere out in the Metrolina area out there. But anyway, right here, Jackie Tinsley field trip. What I like about it is she says these are the things you need to know, and you better find out on your own. Um, and she talks about she's planned them and done them. Authorization, make sure that you've got all the authorization, the forms. Somebody mentioned this week that their district does like medical forms. Make sure all that stuff's taken care of. Your parental notice and consent, the costs, make sure those are all advertised. Safety and discipline, your emergency plans, your evacuation, your transportation, other ones. And then she's got it into non-sponsored and sponsored trips, and she has all the steps you should take. So here's pretty much a checklist of everything. If you're going to be in charge of one, that even if you're a district, and if you have to ask, because a lot of them's advertised policies are incomplete. So that was a good catch on that one. Let's see what else I like this week. Hands to work here. Okay. All right. Some things that were really good that were pointed out. Um, um, Carolina talked about calling parents. I would not call parents. Usually somebody else handles that. You shouldn't be doing that unless you've been given specific permission from your public information office. Usually the transportation or somebody at the school does that. I would not take it upon myself to call parents. Megan talked about be prepared before and after. And again, that's that list. Make sure that you've gone through that. Danya made a good point. Cell phones cause panic. um, yeah, they do. So a lot of times you don't want to do that. Liz is with us tonight. I liked her notion on liability, negligence, duties. Good job with that, Liz. That was a standout answer. When I point these things out every week, that's not required, but you might want to go back and read your classmates' responses because they're good. Um, um, Randy made a good point. Part of the problem with field trips is when kids are on field trips, they don't feel like they're in school, and the rules apply to them. Now, if you've ever had anything to do with high school, you know that every year on the deck of field trip, they'll be drunk. They'll be drinking. Happens every year, every school. I don't know what it is about that DECA crowd. That's that distributive education, the business bunch. They're always drinking on every field trip they've ever gone. Because they, again, Randy made a great point. They don't feel like the school rules apply to them. And so you got to be extra vigilant, especially with chaperones and supervision on those. You really have to do that. Adam made a good point on foreseeability. That's the standard in the law, in the negligence standard and liability standard. What would a reasonable person foresee could be a problem? If you know that you've got a bunch of older adolescents on a trip and you don't have enough chaperones, it's foreseeable that they're going to be doing something they ought not be doing. Kristen talked about going to the hospital. Shonda did. Alicia, as I said, we already talked about what Glenda reported. Emmy talked about pray. That's a good idea. I like that one too. If you go on a field trip, prayer helps. Amy talked about some limits of liability on insurance. What's important about that? You say, Dale, what was that got to do with this? Because a lot of insurance companies have limits on liability on accidents, they'll try to sue you as an individual. Because remember, there's tort liability since '92. They'll try to come after you, even if you didn't do anything wrong. If their hospital bill is $10,000 and there's a and they've got a $7,000 discrepancy between what the insurance liability is and what the cost on them, they'll start suing people. You got to know that. So if you've got an accident where a lot of property is damaged or people are hurt, expect them to come after you. That's a great point. Tanya talked about health cards. A lot of times you need those on field trips, especially if you got kids with medical conditions. Jasmine reminded us to keep everything updated. And one of the things that she pointed out too is because of cell phones, a lot of times the comms will get overloaded at the school. The switchboard will break down, people calling in. That's why you need somebody in the public information office to handle a lot of this stuff. So those were some things that came up. Now, I want to talk about chaperones. So right here, I've got a picture. And let me move this out of the way. I want you to study this map for a minute. You see that dot right there? It's just south of Asheboro. And so there was an EF1 tornado there on Thursday, June the 9th, 1988 at 2:39 p.m. in the afternoon. Now, how did I know how to find that? That'd be like, if you didn't know to look for that, that'd be like trying to find a needle in the haystack. Why do you think I might have known that there was a F1 tornado hit just south of Asheboro on Thursday, June the 9th, 1988 at 2:39 p.m.? How do you think I might have known that? I was there. That's the biggest mistake that I think I ever made in the school business. And I'll tell it on myself. So I was a middle school principal. And we were back in the old days. What you did is the day before school was out, you did field trips. So you get the kids, especially the 8th graders, you're getting off your campus in the middle school because they'll tear the building up. And you tell them not to show up the next day. But the day before, and see, you hold it over their head to behave themselves the spring semester so they can go on the end of your field trip. That's how it used to be. I don't know if it still is. It's been a long time since I was in middle school. That's the way we used to do it. So we had a big trip planned to the North Carolina Zoological Park, which is just south of Asheboro. We got there, and the plan was we would meet back up at the entrance at 3 o'clock to leave. Tangential to that, I had a non-custodial mother who came to school and begged me to let her be a chaperone for her daughter and their group. And against better judgment, I let her be. Stupid on my part, letting a non-faculty member and a non-custodial parent. You can imagine there's a reason why a non-custodial mother is a non-custodial parent. They're not responsible enough to manage a child. That's pejorative, that's ugly, but it's the truth. I should have known that there was a reason why this mother was the non-custodial parent of this child, couldn't be trusted with custody of this child. And so we got there, everything was going good till right after lunch, and the storm started blowing up, and sirens went off to clear the park. And instead of everybody meeting back, we got information to everybody, but we want to go around one more time. And the kid said to the mother said, why don't we? That trolley that goes around. And so I had to run all the way back nearly a mile from the parking lot. I was young and good shape then, trying to get them, and I got them to the park. And unfortunately, by the time we got back to the buses, we were supposed to, we had an emergency meet up at 2. By the time I ran back and got them and got back, just as it hit, we had just pulled off and we had to seek shelter, but it nearly turned our bus over. Trees crashed all around us. It's a miracle we didn't get killed. We could have been, significantly out of the path of it if that parent, that irresponsible parent hadn't said, you can't tell me what to do. This is my child, and decided that they were going to ride another round around the trough. And so the point of the story is you're talking about people's lives here. Chaperones, who you get to be chaperones, and how you train them, and how you discern who you ought to let be and not. You better get control of that. And it's not the time to be egalitarian and everybody gets a chance, or we'll let you prove yourself, or we'll let you prove that you can do. No. If somebody's high risk, absolutely not. If you know them not to be a responsible adult, they can't be a chaperone. Try not to use parents anyway. Try to carry enough school staff to do that, because you got control of them. But those parents, the thing about it is, if something happened, she'd just disappeared. We'd never seen her again. Not my fault. So the story on field trips is on chaperones. Don't let them put you in harm's way because you were trying to be nice or accommodating. There's no time or place for nice or accommodating when student lives are at stake here. And that absolutely happened to me on that day just south of Asheboro at the zoological park. That was, I never made that mistake ever again. I never made the mistake of trying to have a heart or having compassion over safety ever again in my career. That you won't do that. I was lucky to get away with it that time. One time we were lucky we weren't hurt or killed. But that's absolutely a true story. So it's a warning for us all. It's a reminder. It's a cautionary tale for us all that you have a lot of liability on these field trips. You got to take it seriously. All right, looking at our weekly schedule. Our next DB for this week discussion board is reflect on the fact that professional educators have been found financially responsible. That's on a personal level. And what the standards of negligence are. Remember, it's misfeasance, malfeasance. Nonfeasance, misfeasance is you did the wrong thing. You didn't mean to, but you did the wrong thing. Malfeasance is you knew it was wrong, you did it anyway. That's when you can be held criminally liable, not only civilly and lose your money, but you can lose your freedom. And then nonfeasance, you had a duty to act and didn't. You need to understand those standards. Now, there's a Good Samaritan clause in there. That's one of the things that was pointed out this week in one of the statements. The Good Samaritan clauses in all 50 states and the District of Columbia is that you'll be held harmless if you're trying to provide aid and comfort, medical care for somebody, and something goes wrong. As long as you were exercising a reasonable standard of care, there's a Good Samaritan clause. Now, if you did something like take your pocket knife out and try to cut a hole in their trachea, I don't think that law would cover you there. You hear about those stories from time to time, but without medical training, I don't believe I'd be attempting that, or trying to pull a joint back into socket or something dumb. But stopping the bleeding, putting pressure on, CPR, the standard things, you're protected under the Good Samaritan clause. But you need to remember that. All right, so let's talk about our OMA tasks. Let me get that out of the way. All right. For task 1, the standard thing that I'm seeing that we're missing, let me pull it up, is this one. The last element for task 1 of the OMA. This one right here. The contextual analysis clearly describes the school's budgeting processes and procedures, not the budget. Don't just tell me about the bookkeeper. The bookkeeper has nothing to do with the budget. They just do accounting, bill paying. Budgeting is deciding who gets what money. That's what budgeting is. Now, I have one answer: is school doesn't have. Yes, you have some control over your local budget. No, you don't have control over the state or the federal money. But what local money you're given and what school money you raise, you must budget that as well. But the idea here is it asks you what is the budget procedure, the process and procedure, and within that, most importantly, what role does the school improvement team play? It's state law that you have to have a school improvement team that develops a school improvement plan. The extension of that is they're supposed to be involved in the budget so that their academic priorities are then funded. Now, if you say, well, we don't do that, our principal just hands it out, well, then just say my principal hands it out. But you need to know what role your school improvement team plays in developing the local budget, local being local money and school money that you have some control over. What role do they play in that? That's the last element of task one. So if you're with me or you hadn't finished it yet, or if you listen to this later, make sure that you address that. That's the one thing that I'm seeing that we're not understanding. Don't just tell me what the budget is. It's not about the budget. It's about the budgeting process. That's what you've got to learn as a principal, is the process. And again, there's a lot more power in the decisions that are made if it's a group decision with the school improvement team rather than the principal, because teachers are going to beat you up. They all want the money. But if it goes back to these are the initiatives that the school improvement team put together, that's ones that we're going to fund. It gives you some cover for that, and it gives you justification about how the money is divided up. Budgeting is not dividing it up equally between everybody. Budgeting is about setting priorities. Everybody won't get the same. Now, I hate to say it, but art's not on the state report card. The art teacher will want hers. If we have some, we'll give it to her, but we can't make that a priority. Not if our school improvement plan says we need to be spending money on reading. Or science teachers will want SKIS kids. But again, if science is not our most pressing need, we have to understand that we've got to put our money and our schedule behind our most pressing needs. So that's following up with task one. Now for task two, under tonight, I've got right here, task two guidance. Just follow the directions. That's all you have to do. You've got top headings, or what we call elements in the task. For the first one, tells you right here, tell task one goes here, take the labels off of it, stick it under that element. That's the heading. What I have in bold is the heading or the element. That's what goes there. I've got it right down the line. Just follow the directions. It's a simple copy and paste. Just don't copy the directions and the label and the prompts from the AppTel, because that's confusing. Just make sure you just pop them right in there, and everything will be good on task two. And then really that's all there is to it. And that will take you on to task three. Now, in task three, you are to assess your current schedule and either make a new one or a part of a new one to improve your current schedule. So let's look at what that says. Let me pull that up right quick. And I should have already had it, but it went away on me. All right. So for task three, you'll develop an analysis of the existing schedule, current scheduling procedures and strengths and areas for improvement. And what is the procedure? Not just what is the schedule. How do you go about doing it? Do you follow the rationale? What is the rationale? Do you start out with your federal programs first, then add in your state law in terms of class size, length of class, planning and all that, your local policy, how many minutes of reading, how many minutes of math, AB day schedule, block schedule in high school. Do you factor then in your teacher performance data from EVAS and then teacher input? Do you do it in that? Is this the process that you use at your school? Or is it we let teachers pick, or we let certain people do certain things, or do we schedule certain classes instead of our federal programs first and then we're out of compliance? Do we follow this rationale? That's what we want to know. Okay. Have we taken into account our most pressing need from the school improvement team findings? You've already, you were supposed to find your school improvement plan. What they say their initiatives or their priorities were. Is it aligned with that? Alignment with legal requirements for planning instruction. That's what I was talking about. The state law. Is that in there? And if you don't remember what they are, last week I had a document that showed what those are. Are we making sure that we're scheduling those federal programs? You had to do in task 1, you had to do an audit of what federal programs you have at your school. Are we making sure that they come first when we start scheduling our school? Are we doing that teacher input? Are we doing it last? And then we take those and we use those as the basis for revitalizing or revisiting or making a new schedule. You develop a new schedule or draft the current schedule or a part of it like a high school schedule. And then you graph it out just like a master schedule. You can modify the current one or you can make a new one. And that's what task 3 is. It's pretty simple, but make sure that you have gone through these steps when you come up with your new schedule, whether it's a whole new schedule, a modified of the old one, or you just take it and redone part of it. And you should say, we're doing this because of this reason. It doesn't follow federal law. It doesn't in state law. It's not best practices for our teachers. It doesn't follow the school improvement plan. Doesn't have teacher input. Why are you making these recommendations? It should be one of those things. So that's what OMA task 3 is. But again, just go right down the line. Read your prompts. Read the elements of the prompt. Make sure that you've got something that addresses each of those. And it won't be very long. This is, again, not a long one. This one is just a few pages long. But what's really important is that new graphic of that master schedule. And then when you go to 4, you'll write any 12 of the 11 or 12. You can do 11 and 10. You can do 12 and 9. Do at least 11 of your competencies when you write your analysis in task 4. But this one shouldn't. 2 takes 10 or 15 minutes. This should not take that long. If you got all these materials that you were supposed to gather up for task 1, if you've got them on hand, it won't take you long to work through the elements of this task. That's why I said task 1 takes longer than all the rest of them put together. This one goes quick as well. All right, questions. I'll stop my share, catch my breath. Questions you have for me about following the format for OMA task 2 or what's expected of you in OMA task 3. We good to go on that? Everybody's good? All right. So our discussion board, we know what to do on it. We're going to reflect on those standards of negligence in terms of your liability on our discussion board for this week. For our OMA, we're going to knock that task 2 out in about 15 minutes, and we can jump right on into 3. And so we know what our assignment is for the week. Let's look now at our content for the evening. Oh, we're actually 5 minutes ahead of time. That's pretty good. Let me share my screen, and I can close some of these things out. Under Zoom session 3, again, the task 3 guidance, task 2 guidance, the field trip, again, it's a good checklist of all the things that you should know. And then our content for the evening is court cases. This is a law course, and so it's very important to know the background or what cases are most relevant for education in the modern era. So I have done a little handy dandy guide for you here. and I will go over these briefly, but you should spend some more time. Your law book covers a lot of these, and you can always look these up in a law library site if you're not familiar with them. And so here we go on court cases. The modern era of schooling starts in 1954 with Brown versus the Topeka Board of Education. It was a lawsuit filed in response to Plessy versus Ferguson from 1896. 58 years later, a challenge was mounted to Plessy versus Ferguson. Anybody know what the finding was in Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896? It said separate but equal was okay. That you could have segregated schools, but as we all know, separate was not equal. That was the law of the land until 1954. And in 1954, the Supreme Court, in the case Brown versus the Topeka, Kansas Board of Education, said separate's not equal, that we have to integrate schools with all deliberate haste. It's important that all deliberate haste, 1954. What happened for the next 11 years? Nothing. Not the first thing. I don't believe that was with all deliberate haste. It wasn't too hasty. It took the Civil Rights Act of 1965 to get us started with any seriousness or honesty about integrating schools. So when did school integration start across America? North and South Carolina, 1966. A full 12 years after the Brown decision with all deliberate haste. Took 12 years in the Civil Rights Act before we did anything to start integrating schools. I still remember it like it was yesterday. I remember when, and it sounds so pejorative, but when the kids that had been going to the integrated school showed up at our school, bussed in, I remember standing out at the playground and watching the bus come in 1966, the fall of 1966, and watching our school being integrated for the first time in 1966. So yes, I'm old enough. Unfortunately, I started in segregated schools, but thankfully in 1966 that changed. Now, that led to a wave of school consolidation because you didn't need a dual system. Now, just because the federal government forced states to integrate their schools did not mean that states were happy about that. Shamefully, North Carolina didn't want to do it. And so what they said is, what we'll do to keep it from happening or slow it down or prevent it from happening is we'll stop funding the building of schools in North Carolina. So in 1966, North Carolina exited capital funding for schools. What does that mean? That means there are no state dollars that come to you for capital funds to either build or maintain schools. It is, and some, 60 years later, it is still the responsibility of the local school district to build and maintain their schools through the local tax base. The state does not send you money to build or maintain schools. Now, we'll talk about Leandro later. That's one of our big court cases is the Leandro case. And yeah, we're going to talk about case study 1. Hopefully I'll finish up in time to talk about that the last 5 minutes tonight or 10 minutes. The Leandro case, Leandro plaintiffs lost the case. We did not change from a flat grant state funding formula, but we did get the state lottery. And that was for capital funding, but it's been less than useless in state funding. It's not a formula, it's pork barrel. It's all show and no go. There's hardly any dollars left in that. So since 1966, the state of North and South Carolina do not fund schools. The capital needs to build them or to maintain them. They didn't get out of the school building business in North Carolina, nor South Carolina. What they did was start building community colleges. North Carolina has 100 counties. They have 58 community and technical colleges, and all the counties that don't have one, they have a satellite. So that we have 140 buildings. Mecklenburg County, Charlotte alone has 5 separate campuses of Central Piedmont. full campuses. We have enough students for about 15, and we have 140 campuses. That's another thing. We've way overbuilt those. They're all 55 to 60 years old, falling down, infrastructure can't be used, can't upgrade them for technology. They're just big white elephants sitting around everywhere. But we kept on building buildings, but we built community colleges rather than public schools because we were trying to stop integration. Not a banner day for our state, but we've about returned back to that point again now in North Carolina, where we're doing many of this same kind of ugly things. So that's the history of integration. That starts modern schooling in 1966 with the integration of schools. In 1965, along with the Civil Rights Act, we passed the Elementary and Secondary Act, ESSA, the 65 titles 1 through 9. You know what Title 1 is. That's aid for economically depressed children in math and reading. Title 9 is equity. There's 9 titles. And that has kind of shaped the instruction in modern schools as well. Along the way, in 1969, at the height of the Vietnam War, Tinker versus Des Moines Board of Education, kids were protesting the Vietnam War. Why that's significant is, for the first time ever, 1969, the Supreme Court ruled that kids in school have rights. You get due process, just like any other citizen. Equal protection under the law, 14th Amendment. That still is the law of the land today, and that will have a huge impact on you and us as we get through due process and discipline later this semester. But kids get due process rights. That means standard of arbitrary and capricious. Arbitrary being you can't just jerk a kid up. If 2 kids are doing the same thing, if me and Randy are out back smoking, and Liz catches us, Liz can't just send Randy back to class and shoot me. While smoking's a bad thing, and I don't do it, but I think the shooting me for smoking might be a little excessive. That would be called capricious. Arbitrary is she let Randy go and punish me. So that's the due process standard, that the kids get to present witness, they get to question witnesses, they get to hear the charges against them, they get to make a statement, and then their consequences cannot either be arbitrary or capricious. That was all set up by Tinker versus. It changed how we run schools. Man, when I was a kid in school, they just jerk you up. You just anytime, just wear you out, just because they wanted to. He looked like he needed one today. And I mean, it was like Tom and Jerry. I mean, it was, Foghorn Leghorn. If you remember the old Foghorn Leghorn cartoon, when he jerked the dog up and just wear him out. That's the way they used to do us in school. I'm not making that up. They didn't have to have any reason or any cause. They could just whip you whenever they wanted to. And didn't have to have any witnesses. You didn't get, you didn't get to have your say whether you did it or not. They just thrashed you. That has changed, and that's a good thing. The next thing that shaped modern schooling was the Swan case. Again, national case. U.S. Supreme Court said that you had to bus students for racial integration. That was actually a Charlotte case, Swan. Julius Chambers argued that case before the Supreme Court. Famous North Carolina political figure, was past president of North Carolina Central and Durham, but he was the one that argued the case. That held for 30 years, and we'll talk about that one again. The educational amendments from 1972 reaffirmed titles 1 through 9. Then the next thing that happened in 1974, Public Law 94-142. Said that EC kids get to come to school. I didn't go to school with EC children, by the way. There might be one around, but they just helped out the custodians. They did not have free and appropriate education for exceptional children back then. That didn't come in until 1974. And so that's why we'll spend a whole module on exceptional children, 504 McKinney-Vento kids. Because since 1974, they get a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment. And we'll talk about that. But that shaped modern schooling as well. 1975, there was again, the bigots made another run at at ESA, and it was upheld again. Elementary and secondary acts again were upheld from 1965 by the Supreme Court in the Robinson case. 1984, North Carolina and many states started a basic education plan in response to a nation at risk. Diane Ravage's book that said that schools had gone to hell in the handbasket. And so we started trying to improve them. North Carolina, it was called the Career Development Pilot Program. You had status 1, 2, and 3 teachers. And so, which led to the basic education plan in North Carolina in 1983, 84. And then some wise guy in the back, which said that every kid gets a basic education. And some wise guy in the back said, what is a basic education? It took till 1989, but the state of North Carolina wrote a standard course of study, a curriculum for every grade level and every course. Big white thick notebooks. You might remember seeing them sitting around school if you're old enough. And then somebody in 1989 said, all right, you finished this nice curriculum. How are we going to be sure that schools teach that? That's when the accountability program started. I was principal. We started with state PBAP. State performance became the state ABCs in your report card. Brought about end of course, end of grade testing, and SC ready testing. Same thing in South Carolina. But that came in, and prior to that, we did not have any accountability. Prior to that, and prior to 84, we did not have a standardized curriculum. You taught what you wanted to local level. The kids got it fine if they didn't fine. But from 84 on, they were guaranteed a basic education. We defined what it was, and then we started testing to make sure they were getting that basic education. 2001, Swan, 30 years expired. The Capuchon lawsuit ended forced busing for integration. I was in the central office in Charlotte at that time. I thought it would take about 2 to 4 years for schools to resegregate. I was wrong. It took 2 to 4 weeks. We resegregated immediately. After 30 years of having integrated schools, we resegregated immediately. Sad day. 2001, No Child Left Behind. Again, this will be one of our modules. That's when we're doing discipline, because No Child Left Behind says 2 things. Kids don't have to go to a low academic performance school. You know what will happen if that happens? They'll replace the administration, make teachers reapply for their job. Little known part of that legislation, which actually is invoked more than low performing, is kids don't have to go to a persistently dangerous school, which means there are 16 acts of crime and violence defined by the federal government. 9 of those are violence. If you have too many of those, you lose your job as principal if it happens 2 years in a row. We also started growth testing then. If you look at state report cards, proficiency is about who you get, growth about what you do with them. It's taken a long time to get to that. It also speaks to teacher retention. That's why we have teacher working condition survey and the teacher survey in South Carolina. Those are required elements to try to address teacher retention. It's federal law through No Child Left Behind. And also highly qualified and certification. That was all brought in 2001, which we think has been around forever. It's not, just the last 23 years. We'll talk more about those later. EVOS came in 2010, the value added model you learned about last semester, where we started measuring whether teachers are getting growth or not. And then in 2013-14, we started school vouchers and charter schools. Elimination of master's pay and elimination of career status. So those are the things that have shaped public education. Now, I would have added some more things since then, but kind of like the COVID funds, they were just temporary. They changed things for a year or two, but then they went back to normal. And like the latest iteration of ESSA, that's not new. It started in 65, folks. People think, well, that's new. No, it's been around for 60 years. It's just the latest iteration of it. But these are the things that have affected how schools operate today. And so, as you can tell, when I started school, it's completely changed. And in my lifetime, in my school lifetime, school has completely changed. And it will continue to change and evolve. But these are the things that that have shaped what we refer to as modern schooling since 1954. I'll pause and catch my breath for a moment. Questions you have for me about court cases or about how we got where we are in public education? Let's go back and talk about persistently dangerous before we get to it. I want to cover our case studies, but I want to talk about persistently dangerous because it goes back to that manual that I told you was our Bible, that disciplinary data reporting manual. I want to go back to it. So let me share my screen. I want to go back to that. And I want to talk most specifically that, as I said, more principals get caught up on the persistently dangerous calculation than they do on the low performing calculation. So let me go back to that one for us. And so we'll go back to here and I'll pull this one up. All right. Now I'm going to open it up in a separate window here. All right. So in the back of this book, and it tells about this, but right here, I want us to go to the back of the book. All right. There are 16 acts of crime and violence. 9 of them are violence that count against you, and that would be rape, robbery with a dangerous weapon, sexual activity, battery, sexual assault, sexual offense. All of these back here in the back. Serious assault with injury. All of these things. But what I'm showing you this is to make sure that you understand that some things are worse than others. And all the definitions of these things are in the back of your book. And let's see. All right, so now what you need to look at is offense types when you're entering them into Power School, and it tells you what to do. It'll have a code on it and tell you what to do. Let me slide back up. Here we go. Here we go. All right. All right. Here are the 16/17 violent crimes and reportable offenses right here. It's got them defined for you. Now, let's see why there's now. Okay. They've added this one back in. Or they've split a couple. So now they've reclassed. There was 17, and they went to 16 for a year. They're back to 17 again now. Here are the acts of crime and violence. I hope you can see these on your screen. Now, only the acts of violence count against your persistently dangerous total. Now, all these have to be reported to law enforcement. And so, how do you know the difference? Well, right here. It tells you right here. So if you've got assault resulting in a serious injury, you notice that category indicator PD or that prefix PD, that means it's persistently dangerous. You say, well, I'll pick something else. You get caught doing that, you lose your job. If it falls within that, again, go to the back of the book and look at the definition. If it falls within that definition, then you have to select that one, even if you don't want to. Even if you don't want to. You better not get caught under reporting or reporting it. And then when you think nobody's looking, going in and changing it. Both of those are no-nos. And I'll give you an example of both. So we had an incident that happened to one of the small schools at Garinger. It was reported the kid um, had 10-day suspension, got excluded from school, which is an automatic appeal before the board. When they went to get the paperwork for the board appeal, the actual official document has to come out of Power School. Principal had gone in and changed it, not realizing that it would have to be pulled back out on appeal, so that it wouldn't count against her persistently dangerous total. She changed it to something else. She lost her job. You can't do that. That violates the kids' due process rights to do that. It's illegal to do that kind of thing. Now, underreporting. Here's my story on underreporting. We had a public separate school in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, still have it. We have two public separates. They're side by side downtown. Metro and Morgan. Metro is for severely and profoundly handicapped kids. Morgan is for the violent kids, the ones that have to be segregated from the population. Obviously, there's panic rooms inside Morgan School. Something happened, the door wasn't working properly, and they were trying to get a kid who was fighting and hurting them into that room, and somehow the behavior modification technician got his arm caught in the door, and it basically tore his arm out of socket, his shoulder. Really gruesome injury. He was out of work, had multiple surgeries, out of work for more than 6 months. When his workman's comp claim was processed, it was denied by the district. Investigation showed the reason why it was denied was the principal had reported it as an RO, assault on school personnel, not serious. Now, if you read the definition of serious injury, this was well within the category, and her response was, he'll eventually get the use of his arm back, maybe. And I didn't want it to count against us because that put us over the limit. You can't, folks, you can't do that kind of stuff. Yes, if you have too many of these 2 years in a row, it's going to cost you. But if you underreport or intentionally misreport, it's going to cost you your job and your house. So you've got to understand that that's a federal law. Persistently dangerous is a federal law. You can't break federal and state law on reporting of these things. It's a calculation. Every one of these that has PD in front of it, that counts against your calculation for the year. You're allowed one of these for every 200 kids in your building. I used to say 5 for every 1,000, and I actually had principals dumb enough to say, well, that doesn't affect us. We don't have 1,000 kids. No, it's a percentage, nitwit. It's a 0.5%. It's 1 for every 200 kids. How do you not understand that? If you got 200 kids, if you have more than one of these a year, you'll go on the persistently dangerous watch list, which the state sends an audit team out. It gets really ugly. You get under the magnifying glass. If you got 1,000 kids, if you exceed 5, if you get large high school, you can have 15 if you got 3,000 kids. It's a percentage.
So is it the school on the watch list or the principal on the watch list?
School, but you are the principal of the school. Right. So that's a great, Jasmine. I'm glad you asked me that. We have to go on the road like a comedy team. You be my straight man and or straight woman.
And I hate to ask it, but this week touched home because my school has had 2 incidents in the last 2 years, and this is all new. What you're telling me tonight in regards to what that means, because some stuff isn't shared with the staff. We just don't know some of these.
And you're supposed to know this stuff when it happens. But on this calculation, what happens is if you exceed your limit 2 years, the first year the state will come out and do an audit. And if you audit, and they'll use that document, that assessment inventory that I gave you, I adapted that from the state audit when they come out and do this that audit. If everything checks out on your audit, you'll get a second year. But if you exceed a second year, the district has to make a decision. They either have to allow all the kids in your building to be bused to another school that is not dangerous, or they can replace the principal administration. Now, what do you think districts do? Charlotte, we tried one time. We let the kids at Cochran bust them all the way to Ballantyne to J. Robbins. Oh, my God, what a disaster that was. And we said, we'll never do that again. So we just started replacing principals. We tried that, just letting the kids that they get to go to the school of their choice wherever they want to go, and you have to provide them transportation. Not a lot of districts are going to do that. It's a lot easier to replace the administration than to let them. And so you can go back and read the law, and you need to. No child left behind on persistently dangerous. It's in this handbook right here. And so that's the choice the district has to make. Most districts just simply choose to replace the principal and the administration rather than letting kids transfer. But it has to happen 2 years in a row. Now, it only has to happen 1 year if you don't pass your state audit at the end of that year. When your data is bad, state comes out, does an audit, they send a state auditor out. If you pass your audit, then you get a second year. But if your data totals, if you have too many incidents that second year, either we let kids go somewhere else, or you got to go somewhere else as principal. It's a lot easier to move 1 or 2 people than it is a whole building full of kids. That's just the way of the world, folks.
Dr. Lamb, I have a question, and
Yeah.
this is probably ridiculous to most people because I only work in a kindergarten through 2nd grade school. So most of these offenses, well, none of these offenses happen, but where do you look to see if these offenses have happened in the local middle or high schools?
Power school. These have to be in power school, and they're also reported on the state report card.
Okay, so I can look on the state report card for
Yeah.
the local schools.
Yeah, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news. One of the worst incidents, sexual incidents I ever saw was involving a kindergartner and a first grader, by the way. It does happen at that level, unfortunately, and it has to be reported, and it is serious.
That's a great reminder that our age is not exempt from it.
That's exactly right. It happened to Druid Hills. I hate to say that, in Charlotte. It was. I may have nightmares tonight about that. There's all the bad stuff I've done in my career, I'm pretty, I guess I don't have much conscience, but when kids are harmed at the level that was going on at that school, that one sticks with me. I still have, every year every semester when I teach this course, when we go over this, I still, I'll have trouble sleeping tonight thinking about that. Kindergarten, first graders. You couldn't write a horror movie as bad as what was going on there. It's tough, but yes, these things occur. There's no age limit on any of these things. If they happen, they happen. And so, as you can see, if there's a PD in front of it, it's going to count against you. And the first thing you do is report it to law enforcement. If there's an RO and prefix in front of it, you have to tell the police. But it doesn't count against your total, and you can see that. So you got PDs and ROs, and then there are some exceptions. UBs you don't have to report to law enforcement. You do have to report them to the state. Everything has to be reported in power school. Let me say this, and I'm going to repeat it twice. There is no major. There is no minor. I'm going to say it again. There is no major. There is no minor. Anything on this list has to be reported in power school. We report incidents, not outcomes. Don't think, well, if I don't suspend that kid, I don't have to report it. That is not true. If there's a referral on that kid, written or verbal, you have to report it. Consequence type is immaterial. If all you do is conference the kid, you still have to report it. So we have some of these third party, like Educator's Handbook, that we put them in that, and they're supposed to download in, but we forget to do it. Oh, that was just there is no major, there is no minor. All infractions go in power school, period. There's no caveat, there's no but, there's none of that. All infractions go in power school, period. And what you do or don't do in terms of consequence for the kid does not affect the reporting of that to the state. Everything has to be reported, and anything with a PD or an RO prefix has to be reported to law enforcement. And then the superintendent. Remember the law? Someone says report the superintendent, the other one says law enforcement. Then this is one of those. If it's got a PD or an RO, you better tell the law first. Now, there's a caveat to that as well. You notice that there are 4. I've got 3 of them are right here together. You be communicating threats, you be affray, and you be disorderly conduct. You say, well, I don't have to report them. Yes, you do, because they have a general statute number behind that suffix behind it. That GS number means it's a violation of common law in North Carolina. those still have to be reported to law enforcement, even though they're not categorized as a act of crime and violence. They still have to be reported to law enforcement because it is a violation of general statute. Communicating threats, a fray, which is a fight in a public place like a cafeteria or a gymnasium where multiple people are involved, disorderly conduct, and then there's one more that has that as well. Right there, no, that one's an RO. Let me find it. Burning of a school building has to be reported. Disorderly conduct. There should be one more. I think right here. This one had, oh, I see it right here. This one has been upgraded from a UB right here. Oh, this one has had the general statute taken off of it. Unlawfully setting a fire. That one used to have a general statute number behind it. I would still report that to law enforcement. It is not required anymore right here.
Dr. Lamb, all of these reportings are for students, even if they have an identified disability. So what about if a student with autism is likely to make some of these threats and say these things, and there's no, I don't know, evidence or warrant to be concerned, you still have to report it that way?
Absolutely. Again, the reporting is not tied to consequence. Now, you can decide according to your local, and we'll go over this on discipline night. The state doesn't set penalty for any of this stuff. You notice there's nothing that says if you do this, you get that. That's in the local's code of conduct. And we'll talk on EC night about change of placement. You know, one of the things that principals do, which is stupid, is they think that if you know, and the actual law is butt and seat. If their butt's not in the same seat as yesterday, that's a change of placement for an EC kid. Yeah, I don't care if it's down the hall. I don't care if it's ISS. If you move him from where they normally sit that day, that's a change of placement, and it counts in that 10 days. You know, at 10 days, you got to do a manifestation determination, functional behavior assessment, updated IEP, psychological, and, you know, functional behavior assessment. You got a deck 5. You got to do all that stuff at 10 days of changing placement, whether it's out of school, in school, doesn't matter. Bounced or, you know, ISS or IC, it doesn't matter. If he's not in his regular seat, that's a change in placement. Now, the caveat to that, where we get dumb principals, and I can't tell you the number that I've had to say this. Well, we get to 10 days. So code of conduct says if you do this, you get 3 days. We're just going to give them one at a time. That way we won't have to do that paperwork. The magic number here is 3. The third time a kid commits the same infraction, that is showing a pattern. He passes go. He gets to the front of the line. You start the manifestation paperwork. Third time, I don't care. I don't care if all you did was give him ISS for 2 days. The third time, an exceptional child does the same thing. We check to see if it's a manifestation of their disability. But you notice in that handbook, it doesn't have a punishment. So if an autistic kid is making threats, that doesn't mean we have to suspend him out of school. Doesn't mean we have to change his placement. None of that. It simply means we have to report it because there's a victim in that. We have to report it. See, schools think if I report it, I've got to punish them. No, that's not how it works. We go by the code of conduct. And they also think I get up to 10 days. You know, this EC kid can fight 10 times before I have to do that paperwork. No, they can't. The third time they do the same thing, you start the paperwork. That's what you have to understand. Now, we're going to cover this all in depth, but the biggie for tonight to understand is persistently dangerous. That's a law, has been on the books for 23 years now, and it will trip you up in a minute. So what do principals and schools do? They cheat, they lie, they underreport, or they hide it, they put it in, take it out. There's a way for us, there's an exception report every month. We run that to see if you changed anything. Or he'll get better, like that principal said. He'll eventually, with enough surgeries, get used to that arm back, maybe. That kind of stuff. But you know that shows intent when you do stuff like that. That's criminal. That's that criminal negligence that we keep talking about. That's when you not only lose your job, you might lose your freedom to go along because you showed intent to commit a crime there, and so that won't go well for you. People say, well, I'll take my chances. If I report all this stuff, I know they'll fire me. But if I don't, well, you're taking a chance not only on your job but your liberty as well by underreporting or not reporting. Charlotte, I can't tell you the number of administrators I had to fire over this. I did a lot of bad stuff. Y'all know I'm no saint. I had to do a lot of bad stuff. Probably the most significant thing in my career, I fired a principal, and during the 5-day waiting period, he killed himself. Absolutely happened. Barry Bowe, Northwest School of the Arts, right there on Beatty's Ford Road. During the 5-day waiting period, he didn't show back up for his 5 days hearing. Sent the police over, and he killed himself. This is serious business, but you got to do your job. You got to report. Otherwise, bad things are really going to happen to you if you don't report. This is serious stuff. This No Child Left Behind has put some real teeth in making sure that you don't have an unsafe or persistently dangerous school, and where kids are victims and faculty members are victims, and you're above the fray and you just hide it, lie about it, cover it up. That will not happen. If you do that, eventually your district will be forced to do something bad to you, or they'll lose their federal and state funding. That's where that is. Let's talk about our case study for next week. Your team should be formed. You should be working on your case study. The first one, again, it's about grading. Again, I'm going to say this for the 17th time. The principal is not at fault here. The superintendent is not at fault. The teacher went rogue. She manipulated the school's grading system, which is set by the local Board of Education as a directive from the State Board of Education. The state board policy is very clear. Now, these rules were actually waived during COVID, by the way, but they're back in place again now. The state exam in North Carolina counts 30%. In South Carolina, the quarterlies for SC Ready count 10, and the state exam counts 20. So they still count 30 in the end. Homework in aggregate and out-of-class assignments can count 10% each. In-class assignments obviously count 50%. And tests. You can decide whether 20 for one, 30 for the other, ever how you want to do that. But in aggregate, homework, whether you call, the assignment that Billy, that Billy turned in, whether you call that homework or an out-of-class assignment, in aggregate, all of them for the year can only count 10%. The teacher manipulated the grading scale to count that one assignment more than half the yearly grade so she could fail the kid. That is an exclusion for a year without due process. That's called a zero tolerance. That's a violation of federal law. It's in that handbook I just pulled up there. It speaks to zero tolerance. That is a violation of federal zero tolerance policy law. You cannot do that. That kid gets a hearing. You can't just put him out for a whole year. That's the most punishment you can give a kid. A kid could have brought a gun to school and got less punishment than that. He got put out for a whole year, overturned in his brother's homework assignment. And so you need to trace the law, why the teacher did this. But the big thing for me that I'm going to ask you, not next week, but, next week for week 4, when our groups get together, is what are you going to do with that teacher? So don't be confused. This is not a political case. Doesn't matter about it. That's just in there to confuse you. Look at some of the previous ones. Let me share my screen again. I think I probably have a video in there next week. I've got all the materials that you need. Move that out of the way. Take that disc out. I've got a bad disc. Take it out. So next week, what have I got under Zoom session 4? What goodies do I have for you for next week? I've got a video of the one from last spring. I've got the case study. You're going to be asked to address the ethical issue here as well in terms of the teacher's behavior. I've got zero tolerance policy in the school to prison pipeline. Reporting, this is out of the handbook. And then I've had people say, well, this is the coach's fault that Bobby didn't have time because he was no, there's a North Carolina and South Carolina has a handbook for athletics that defines to the day and the minute how much practice time. So unless your coach is violating the practice time guidelines, this is not a coaching problem either. I've had people argue that this is the coach's fault. It is not. This is the teacher's fault. Now, every case study, it won't be the teacher's fault. One of them is superintendent's fault. One of them is principal's fault. But this first one, don't try to wiggle the teacher off the hook. This is simply a personnel issue with a teacher who did the wrong thing intentionally. She malpracticed on the kid. Question is what are you going to do? And please don't be the person wearing a thimble, the pinhead who says, well, we'll support her in public, but privately we'll tell her not to do that again. Don't be that idiot. This is not something that you can support your teacher. Do you remember when you were a little kid and your mother said to you, Josh, if your friend Billy jumped off the roof, would you jump off too? That's what this is. This teacher has violated the law. Are you going to jeopardize your family, your future, your freedom by breaking the law as well? So this notion here of, yeah, we'll support her publicly, but privately we'll tell her not to do that. No. You've got to address this. Again, the superintendent can't bail you out. The law says it has to be you. It has to be you. What are you going to do now, hero? That's what we want to know next week. Anybody have anything for the good of the group before we end tonight? I'm a couple minutes past our time, but we're good. Again, you're doing great work. Tamla, again, star of the week. Liz, most of you have got a star recognition this week. You're doing really good work. I'm really pleased. And I'm looking forward to our case study. Hopefully, if you can keep me from talking too much, we can get through it without being midnight before we get done next week. But I applaud you for your effort and your work. I appreciate you as always. I'll see you next week. Thank you.
Dr. Lamb.
Yes, sir. I'm ready for questions.
Quick question. Do we have to all agree on how we?
No,
Okay.
You don't have to all agree. No, but you ought to be able to articulate why you don't. Okay. This is why I think we ought to do this or not do that, or and be able to voice why. Other than because I think, because I said so or because I think so. I mean, you ought to be able to cite the law policy for the position that you take, or the ethical concern, because you got to review the ethics. I mean, you got to understand the ethical paradigms. You need to be able to support whatever decisions or recommendations that you make, and if they're not the same for everybody, that's fine, as long as you can support them. But now, I suspect y'all already know. If you say dumb things next week, I'll say dumb things to you too as well. My job's, I'm not going to try to be ugly or rude, but my job's not to make you feel good. My job is to keep you from losing your house. You've got to understand this stuff because we're playing for keeps with this. This is real. This is operational stuff. This is everyday reality. So as long as you can support it, I'll respect it. Now, it may be wrong, but I'll still respect it. But you got to be able to support, what you want to do when you answer those questions, because there's questions that you got to answer in your presentation. They're right there in the directions. All right, that's a good question. All right, everybody's good. All right, I'll see you next week.